welcome. So today we're going to be discussing Toni Morrison by Richard Andersen. Toni Morrison is my favorite author, writer, poet, whatever. Along with Stephen King and C.S. Lewis. And though, because I believe those to be by far the most impactful writers I have ever read. And so I want to share their books and what they discuss. And so, of course, today we're starting off with a kind of short biography on her, but then Richard Andersen goes into her books, her most popular books. Some of them I read, some of her books I haven't. Like, let's be real, I'm not like, too indulgent in anything. I believe in, sharing the load to some extent, but I wouldn't even refer to myself as an avid reader. I love reading, but I love it for, I think, maybe a different reason than some people might love reading. I love reading for the complexity of language. I find the way a writer writes to be so much more compelling than the story that they're attempting to showcase. So if you can tell me a story and use certain language or talk in a certain way, use semantics and just language, and if you can do that in a certain way that also supports the story you're telling, I find that so much more intriguing than the actual story. And of course, I believe that Toni Morrison, Stephen King, and C.S. Lewis have done this to perfection. I'll be discussing Stephen King and C.S. Lewis later. And I'll also in conjunction as to why, like my favorite books from each of them. But today we're focused on Toni Morrison. I've read two of her books. I've read A Mercy and The Bluest Eye. A Mercy I read first. I was in an AP English course in high school, and she was just one of the books we read, and I only read it that one time because it was so intense. And I've just had it in the back of my mind to go back and read it, but I kind of want to clear my mind of what it was about and reread it again. But it is my favorite book. I have not read that book since high school, so years, 10, 15, 17, 18 years ago. But I remember the way it was written was so distinct and different than anything I've read in my life, and everything I've read since, and everything I could ever read. I just, I mean, yeah, after the Bible, the Bible is also written in the way that I'm referring to. The language and how language is used in the Bible supports what the overall goal of the Bible is, right? So the parables, there's some confusion in how things are interpreted. That's because I believe the Bible wanted the space for confusion, because if it was a little confusing, then it kind of is more general, right? So I believe, so that's one of those examples, if I can show what I mean by how literature, language can be used to support a storyline. I just believe Toni Morrison has done that the best, and that's why she's my favorite author. Now, yes, I've seen her interviews and things like that. Of course, she is an amazing thinker as well. so completely in love with in love with her as a person. And honestly, just almost everything about her, I feel as though I aligned with, and not on purpose. Like, there's some things, like sometimes she's come off would come off as kind of tomboyish and things like that, locks, things like that. I've had locks maybe 2 times in my life so far. Like, there's so many commonalities, and not even on purpose, because I was just already that person. So I have a lot of interest in her. But in discussing Toni Morrison, I'm going to read a line by Richard Andersen, attempting to interpret Toni Morrison's writing. And the line pretty much goes, Pecola is conscious of what she is saying about the dandelions. What she doesn't realize is the underlying meaning of her message, the part that has been formed by the racism she has internalized within her psyche. That message reads, since I can't be pretty, I'm not going to let the dandelions be pretty either. Releasing her anger with herself on the dandelions allows Pecola to feel a little better about her humiliation in the store, but the feeling lasts only until she remembers Mr. Yokobowski's blue eyes. Okay, so this is pretty important, because in that moment, there's a little story before that he's referencing. But in that moment, in the Bluest Eye book, of course, we begin to understand how self-hatred or internalized racism comes about. And Pecola's character in the book, The Bluest Eye, she's a young girl. I think about 10, something less, right? And we have to understand a lot of trauma, like internalized racism, starts as a young child. And Toni Morrison is intelligent enough to take the lack of life experience and put that onto a child, but make this child seem so self-aware, right? This child is not, children don't typically have, that understanding. But she is showing how we can take minor details, like the store owner, which is the Mr. Yokobowski, blue eyes. It's such a small thing. Like, if you're interacting with another human, you can notice their eyes, yes, but like in how he interacted with Pecola, like, pretty much showing signs of hatred towards her because of her black skin and such. Toni Morrison takes this small detail and turns it into a book. And mind you, I believe a sort of scary book, because I'm into scary books. I'm a Halloween lover. But she turns this simple detail into a story about how internalized racism can be created. So in so many of us, it just takes a little thing, an interaction between you and another individual, and it usually is a teacher, some adult that your parent is not interacting with commonly, but sometimes, it could be interactions that your parent is involved in, but it sometimes just happens when there's a power dynamic early on in your youth where you didn't have the power to speak up. And so that is what occurs in that relationship with that store owner, Mr. Yakubowski. The parent was nowhere near. She didn't really have a good relationship with her mother. Or Claudia, the other character, didn't have a good relationship with her mother. They both, I don't think, did, if I remember correctly. But it really goes into telling us how when we're not interacting with our kid and talking to our kid, there's so many outside forces that can put us in a state of detriment. And that one interaction stayed with Piccola for, I would say, forever. And that book was, I remember I read that, I think I was about 23 when I read it. So it's a couple, like maybe more 10 plus years ago. That one moment turned into a scary story for us. And that is how we should view internalized racism. What Toni Morrison does in this book, she's saying it is scary for you to believe that the white man, a white separatist, racist individual is better than yourself. It is scary. You should be in fear of this. You should hate it. I'm showing you a little girl, Piccola, who is if you're not careful, you would be experiencing this same scary story. And just from a minor power dynamic. And yes, Mr. Yakubowski was racist, right? Because he had power in that situation over Piccola's youth, of course, right? And just being the store owner as well. And he also, of course, has his prejudice to go along with it. And so we as Americans, African Americans, Haitian American, Black people, underserved people, because it's not just Black people dealing with this. Asians are dealing with this, Native Americans, Hispanic individuals, but just all the groups that are non-white individuals are dealing with the hierarchy that the white patriarchal system has created. And it's having us live in a constant state of fear and jealousy. And we have to go through what that all means, what we're doing to sustain ourselves right after Piccola has that interaction with Mr. Yakubowski, where he's pretty much indifferent to her, doesn't really care for her. She had just bought candy from his store, and to fill up that hole of shame she felt about herself, she starts to, take down that candy and remembers that she has it and it's going to make her happy. And so many of us do that. We try to dull or weaken the shame and fear and jealousy and that we have by indulging in bad behaviors, if you perceive them as such. Piccola also walks out and she breaks apart that dandelion, as I read, and because she decides that the beauty of this dandelion shouldn't exist if she can't be naturally beautiful as well. And she also, in that moment, she becomes a sort of Mr. Yakubowski, right? She takes her power and prejudice out on that dandelion, right? It's a smaller thing. And in that moment, I think it also discusses Mr. Yakubowski, right? Because how shameful it is for someone to grow and become an adult and take out his anger on a child and his prejudice on a child, people that don't have the power to fight back. And that is something to be said to all white separatists and to the United States government, to go into other countries and try to harm them rather than support their growth and them growing up to be the most confident and strong countries they can be, And I think that Toni Morrison does that well. And I just wanted to speak to her. This is what she does in all her books. I personally find and Mercy is also scary to me, if I remember it correctly. But I think what she's doing is making us view what the white man and the white gaze is doing to us and say, do not take this with you. Leave it with them. Imagine a world where we ignore the heck out of white racists and separatists. They would no longer be the main character, right? They're no longer the important part. They're no longer at the apex of that hierarchy. And I think it would hurt them the most if we didn't internalize racism. And I think that she does this in all of her writing. And that is the most consistent thing I would say about Toni Morrison. She is attempting to speak to Black people very clearly and say, you are not what the Mr. Yabowskis of the world say you are. You know, you don't have to want what they want, because you don't even need what they have to be amazing. And we've seen interviews with Toni Morrison where she says, you know, to an interviewer in discussion of racism, without your color whiteness, without whiteness, what are you? Do you even know who you are without being white? What would you call yourself? What would you describe yourself as? If, you know, some of these white separatists and racists are going about their whole lives with the privilege of just being white, not with being smart, not with being funny, not with being culturally savvy and cool or anything like that. They're just living off of their whiteness. And because if we equate whiteness to Blackness, which historically, I guess we've been trying to do, find equality, then the white part no longer becomes anything. It means nothing if everyone is equal in their skin color. So white people would feel nothing. They would feel, you know, white separatists, I should say, would feel like their lives lack anything. And I do believe this is true. And I do think that Toni Morrison showcases this in The Bluest Eye, A Mercy, as well as many of her other books. And Richard Andersen just does a great job of speaking on her. And I hope you all get to read this, because if you are a writer or attempting to write books, which I am, I think that this gives a good detailed view on how you can use language to decipher and discuss certain topics, right? And so you should all give this a good read.